Let's skip to the next chapter now, to Chapter 22, The Rise of Organized Labor. In 1886, Andrew Carnegie, the richest man in America at the time, wrote with patriotic pride, "The old nations of the earth creep on at a snail's pace. The republic thunders past with the rush of an express." Indeed, the United States experienced stunning economic growth in the decades following the Civil War. By 1900, America's factories produced more manufactured goods than its nearest three competitors, Britain, France, and Germany combined. As America's post-war industrial economy surged ahead, along with the new technologies came changes in the workplace and rising tensions between capital and labor. Historians often use the terms capital and labor to represent two groups in the economy. Capital represents the owners of industry and the financial institutions such as big banks. Labor represents the working class, both the workers themselves and the organizations that advocate their interests and strive to improve their lot. In the era of extraordinary economic growth after the Civil War, ordinary American workers did not share equally in the new prosperity. Many suffered from long hours of routine labor and from poor or dangerous working conditions. Employers pushed workers to work harder, faster, and longer. When workers demanded safer conditions or better pay, politicians often proved willing to use government power to protect the interests of capital against the demands of labor. Faced with these challenges, workers did not suffer in silence. In an era when capital and labor were undergoing sweeping changes, the men and women who fueled America's booming industrial economy organized to better their working conditions and preserve their dignity. New work and a new workforce. As business boomed after the Civil War, American industries required additional labor. Many new workers came from the farmlands of New England and the Midwest. Declining crop prices made it difficult for many small farmers to stay in business and pay off their debts, so they left the farms to find work in the factories. Other workers came from overseas. Many of these immigrants arrived on crowded steamships from the British Isles. Others came from the impoverished countrysides of Hungary, Poland, Italy, Germany, Turkey, and Scandinavia. Still others arrived from Asia and the Middle East. A later chapter explores the experiences of immigrants. Many foreigners came to American cities for the same reason that American-born farmers left the countryside for the factory. The same technologies that drove down crop prices in America hurt farmers across the globe, spurring many to leave their homes in search of industrial work. A little bit are off, but the booming industrial economy raised the standard of living for many Americans after the Civil War. While very few people experienced the rise from rags to riches, dramatized by Horatio Alger's popular novels, there was some opportunity for upward social mobility. Some workers managed to climb to the ranks of the middle class, taking jobs as salespeople, clerks, and managers. Immigrants and former farm workers who took on the unskilled labor in factories also found themselves in some ways better off than they had been. For working-class immigrants, even low-paying factory jobs in America might pay 5 or 6 times as much as they could earn in their homeland. Because farm products and timber were more abundant in the United States than in Europe, working-class American families paid less for food and shelter, and might have a little money left over for items like prefabricated clothing and furniture. Still, while there was more wealth to go around in the post-war industrial economy, most of that wealth went to a very small percentage of the population. They retained a wide gap between the working class and the middle class, and an even wider gap between the vast majority of the populace and the class of the super-rich, Carnegie, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Morgan, Stanford, and a few others. For all the greater opportunity and small comforts that industrial workers enjoyed compared to their lives in Europe or on the farm, much of the work in industrial America was difficult, tedious, and often dangerous. Mass production. Mass production changed the nature of work. Tasks once performed by skilled craftsmen in small workshops, where owners labored side by side with workers, were transformed by new machinery and new processes that reduced the amount of time and skill required to make a product. Take shoemaking, for example. In 1800, a skilled master craftsman guided a small number of apprentices through the long and complicated process of cutting, shaping, and sewing individual shoes for individual customers. With the invention of the sewing machine, the rise of the factory system, and the military's enormous demand for shoes in standardized sizes during the Civil War, the old ways disappeared. Factory owners began to invest heavily in new machines that could churn out more shoes at lower cost. One machine nailed on heels, another sewed the upper part of the shoe to the sole. In all, a process that once required a single craftsman and his helpers was broken into dozens of separate tasks, each performed by a different factory worker or on a different machine. The new shoemaking procedure was so dull and repetitive that one worker complained that he had himself become a mere machine. Once the factories took over, and most of the old master craftsmen went out of business. Speed and monotony. Two qualities characterize most mass production work. Speed and monotony. Business owners aim to reduce the cost of production by speeding up the work. If there was a way to make something faster and cheaper, business owners tried it. The owners might speed up the rate of work or base wages on the workers' rate of output. One manager boasted, "We keep rates of pay low so they have to keep right at it to make a living." That's a good thing. A manager in a Swift meatpacking factory stated, "If you need to turn out a little more, you speed up the conveyors a little, and the men speed up to keep pace." Many factory jobs required constant repetition of the same monotonous task over and over, day after day. A report on working conditions described the experience of women sorting vegetables in food canneries. Fast-moving conveyor belts carry past the girls and women a ceaseless stream of peas or beans to be picked over for broken or spotted vegetables. Hour after hour, from morning until night, the workers' eyes and attention must be intent on the moving stream before them. The task upon eyes and attention is severe, and even after considerable experience, women complain of nausea and dizziness resulting from the monotonous examination of the moving surface of the conveyors. The same report described the unrelieved monotony of the work done by the girls and women who packed the innumerable small objects which must be wrapped before they reach the retail stores, such as all sorts of glass objects, lamps, crackers, candy, and other foodstuffs. The job demanded from the woman no more judgment or skill than to feed a machine, only speed and the indefinite repetition of dull mechanical movements. Child labor. Many families found it so hard to make ends meet that they sent their children to work in mills, mines, or factories. In the textile mills of New England and the South, young girls assisted at the clacking machines, all the while breathing lint-filled air that caused respiratory diseases and shortened many lives. Young boys were sent deep into the cramped shafts of coal mines. Some, as young as 5, worked as breaker boys, separating rocks from the newly mined coal. They started work at dawn and picked at the coal all day long, chewing tobacco to keep from swallowing coal dust. Children who worked 12 hours a day, 6 hours a week, had no time to attend school. When interviewed, many admitted that they had never even heard of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln. One youngster, when asked to locate Europe, guessed that it was on the moon. By the early 1880s, a handful of states passed laws saying that children had to be at least 12 to work and that child laborers could put in no more than 10 hours a day, but these laws were rarely enforced, so many employers ignored them. The hazards of industrial life. While some skilled workers earned high wages, most laborers did unskilled work for low pay. They hunched over machines in factories or hauled crates on and off ships. They cut and sewed garments in dark, crowded, stifling factories called sweatshops. They laid track of thousands of miles of railways. They swept streets, served meals at restaurants, or cleaned chimneys and gutters. They did all this without the benefits of the minimum wage, medical care, or safety laws. When business was slow, they were fired. Supervisors kept a watchful eye on the activities of their workers, constantly searching for new ways to control them. The managers of a cotton mill in Forsyth County, North Carolina, painted over the windows to keep the workers from gazing out at the countryside. 19th century factory employers worked 12 and even up to 16 hours a day. In 1889, the Bundy Manufacturing Company began to produce time clocks. These devices monitored the specific times when workers arrived and left the workplace. Each worker would punch in by inserting a paper card into the time clock, which would register the time on the card. For those who left the farm for the factory, the time clock was especially hard to get used to. On the farm, they had worked according to the sun and its changing seasonal rhythms. Now they had to adjust to a factory system designed to keep them working hard and consistently for hours on end. Many factories were unhealthy and even dangerous places to work. Repetitive movements caused muscles to ache and joints to throb with pain. Workers fainted in overheated sweatshops and steel factories. Lint floating in the air of cotton mills filled workers' lungs, making it difficult to breathe. Coal dust in the mines led to a fatal disease known as black lung, causing a person to suffocate to death slowly over the course of years. Injury and death rates were high. Between 1880 and 1900, more than 35,000 workers died on the job each year, and another 500,000 were seriously injured. One of the worst industrial disasters occurred in 1911 when fire broke out at the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York City. Factory owners had locked the doors to keep their workforce, mostly young immigrant women, from leaving early. When the fire started, the workers could not get out. To escape burning to death, many young women leaped to their deaths from windows on the top floors. In all, 146 factory workers died. Railroad work was especially dangerous. Workers lost fingers attaching rail cars in the yards. They lost legs and arms under the wheels of 35-ton locomotives. They fell off the roofs of moving trains while trying to turn on the brakes in high winds and bitter cold. There were few, if any, regulations to protect workers from unsafe conditions and long hours. Most business owners favored a laissez-faire economy in which government did not tie down capitalists with rules and regulations. "Leave things as they are now," advised Andrew Carnegie. "If asked what important law I should change, I must perforce say none. The laws are perfect." Blue and white-collar workers. Economists use the term blue-collar and white-collar to categorize different kinds of jobs. Generally, blue-collar occupations involve manual labor, such as factory work. White-collar occupations, such as doctors, engineers, or secretaries, involve professional or office work. During the 19th century, professional and semi-professional men often wore starched white shirts with suits, while manual laborers wore shirts made of more durable fabric, often blue in color. According to the 1900 federal census, there were about 11 million farmers and agricultural workers in the United States at the turn of the century. The industrial workforce was dominated by blue-collar laborers, between 11 million and 13 million. About 5 to 6 million people were employed in the growing white-collar sector. These white-collar men and women were professional and technical workers. They included doctors and lawyers, factory managers, clerical workers such as secretaries and clerks, and sales workers whose numbers grew with the emergence of department stores and mail-order firms. American industries needed large numbers of unskilled employees to do the heavy lifting, but they also required managers, engineers, accountants, clerks, and salespeople. Demand rose for a more educated and skilled workforce. By the 1920s, the majority of all Americans attended at least some high school. This experience prepared them to enter the managerial and professional ranks. Few people who started as unskilled workers managed to become white-collar professionals, but there was more social mobility across generations. Many children of blue-collar families were able to climb a rung or two on the social ladder. Between 1880 and 1930, 30 to 40% of the sons of blue-collar workers achieved middle-class status. Skip to page 514. The Knights of Labor. The largest American labor organization of the 19th century started out as a secret society among a small group of garment workers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Established in a meeting hall in December 1869, the Noble and Holy Order of the Knights of Labor aimed to unify the workers of the nation into a single powerful organization. Its goals were ambitious, almost utopian. They called for a radical change in the existing industrial system and a new system which will secure to the laborer the fruits of his toil. In 1879, Terence Powderly, a railroad machinist, became the Knights' leader. Under his direction, membership grew quickly. The motto of the Knights of Labor was simple: "An injury to one is an injury to all." Union members would look out for each other regardless of skill level, nationality, or employment status. Powderly believed that workers could better achieve their goals through the legislative process than through strikes. He saw the Union as a political force that could change the laws to better suit the working class and elect friendly politicians. The Knights successfully supported candidates in more than 200 towns in 30 states. Powderly himself was elected mayor of Scranton, Pennsylvania. The Knights pushed for an income tax on the wealthy, the abolition of child labor, an 8-hour workday, free farmland for working families, public ownership of railroads, and the establishment of cooperatives, worker-owned businesses. By the mid-1880s, roughly 700,000 workers belonged to the Knights, including women and African Americans. Yet, just when the Knights became a national force, a violent confrontation in Chicago changed the course of labor activism in the United States. Violence at Haymarket. On May 1st, 1886, labor activists across the country staged massive strikes, speeches, and parades to demand an 8-hour workday. In all, some 350 American workers participated in this first ever observation of May Day, a labor holiday now observed around the world. In Chicago alone, some 40,000 people staged a work stoppage. work stoppages. Meanwhile, the owners of the McCormick Reaper factory locked out 1,400 workers and replaced 300 of them with other laborers that union members insultingly called scabs. This action led to 2 days of angry protests outside the factory gates. On May 3rd, union members tried to prevent the replacement workers from reporting to work. In the chaos that followed, Chicago policemen opened fire, killing at least 4 strikers. The next day, despite a cold wind blowing off nearby Lake Michigan, a crowd of about 1,500 Chicago workers assembled at Chicago's Haymarket Square to protest the shooting. As the final speaker was concluding his remarks, a line of police officers converged on the audience. They demanded that the crowd disperse. The protesters were clearing the square when someone hurled a bomb at the law enforcement officers. The explosive, which one newspaper reporter described as a miniature rocket, landed directly in the line of policemen, with terrible force shaking buildings on the street and creating havoc among the police. The police began shooting into the crowd. In all, 8 police and at least 7 civilians died that evening. Hundreds more lay wounded. The Haymarket riot convinced many people that the country was on the verge of a revolution by anarchists, those who opposed any form of government. Americans had heard of violent acts by anarchists in European cities, and now they feared such violence had come to their own land. Many blamed organized labor for the violence at Haymarket. In a weekly journal sympathetic to workers, one writer lamented, "The bomb was a godsend to the enemies of the labor movement." Within 2 days of the bombing, police arrested hundreds of union activists. 8 local Chicago anarchists were charged with inciting the bombing. In the trial that followed, justice was displaced by a nearly hysterical desire for vengeance. Though there was no concrete evidence linking the accused men to the bomb thrower, who was never caught, the jury found all 8 defendants guilty. 4 died on the gallows, another died in prison. The American novelist William Dean Howells lamented, "This free republic has killed 5 men for their opinions." Although the Knights of Labor were not responsible for the bombing, law enforcement officers around the country used Haymarket as an excuse for breaking the union. The police arrested leaders of the Knights and harassed their members. As the group's membership declined, employers felt more at liberty to fire union workers. By the late 1880s, organized labor once again stood on the brink of extinction.